This isn't just the story of one man. It's the story of pain you didn't choose, a rushed escape, a single fall that changed everything, and a kind of grace that shows up when it feels like life has already shut the door. His name was Mephibosheth, but to understand what happened to him, you have to go back to before the fall, before the running, before the hiding, back to a palace that looked calm on the outside, even though it was already shaking underneath. Picture an ordinary morning in Gibeah, inside Saul's palace. Sunlight slips through tall windows and soft linen curtains. Servants move fast, setting the royal table, carrying food and spices, straightening fabrics, keeping everything perfect. Guards march through stone hallways like clockwork. The whole place feels stable, secure, untouchable. But that's just the surface. Behind those golden walls, Saul's kingdom is trembling in silence. Reports are coming in. Messengers are rushing. Leaders are meeting in private. War is always near, and everyone can feel it, even if nobody says it out loud. And in the middle of all that, a little boy runs through the central hall laughing, completely unaware of the storm coming for his world. Mephibosheth is small, full of energy, and totally convinced the palace belongs to him. He grabs bits of cloth and turns them into swords and capes. Every column becomes a fortress. Every staircase becomes a castle. He's living inside his imagination, like any kid would. His nurse follows behind him, smiling, calling him softly, "My prince, be careful." But he just laughs and keeps running. And here's the thing. Even though he's just a child, his name already carries weight. He's not just any boy in the palace. He's Saul's grandson, the grandson of Israel's first king. And he's the son of Jonathan, the nation's most respected warrior. Jonathan was known for courage, wisdom, and compassion. He was next in line for the throne, and yet he did something almost unthinkable. He surrendered his personal ambition because he recognized something bigger than himself. He loved the truth more than power. Jonathan knew David was chosen by God, and instead of jealousy, he felt honor. He made a covenant with David, an oath so strong it was deeper than politics, deeper than strategy, deeper than survival. It was loyalty of the soul. But while that friendship was being sealed in the background of history, the nation was still tense. The Philistines pressed in on the borders. Rebellion surfaced in corners. And even among Israel, people were divided, some clinging to Saul's legacy, others believing in God's promise about David. Mephibosheth, of course, has no idea about any of this. He's still racing down palace corridors, pretending to fight battles that only exist in his mind. His small hands grip a wooden stick like it's a spear. He makes little battle sounds, acting out victories like a child who believes the world is safe. He doesn't know this might be the last day he ever runs like that, because not far away the real battle is unfolding dust, blood, shouting, steel. Saul, worn down and trapped in the end of his reign, is facing his final moments. Jonathan fights beside his father with honor, like he always has, but destiny is already moving. The royal line is about to snap, not because of a clever political move, not because of a better military strategy, but because God is raising a new throne, fulfilling a promise made to a shepherd named David. Back at the palace, the air changes. Servants move differently, quicker, tighter, like people trying to hold something together with their hands. The smell of oil and iron drifts into the halls. Messengers come and go with faces that look like they've seen too much, and over everything sits this heavy silence, the kind you feel right before a storm breaks. Then it happens. The palace gates burst open with a violent crash. The sound echoes through marble halls like thunder. A man staggers inside, clothes torn, face covered in dust, tunic stained with blood that isn't only his. He's crossed a battlefield to deliver the news nobody wants to hear. His eyes are wide, his voice shakes, and he shouts the words that change everything. Saul is dead, Jonathan too. It's like time freezes. In the next room, Mephibosheth's nurse hears it and goes pale. The cloth in her hands slips to the floor. Her eyes fill with tears because she knows what these words mean beyond grief. The king is dead. The heir is dead. The throne is empty. And in those ancient kingdoms, when a new king rises, the old line is often wiped out. Not always because of justice, not because of truth, but because of fear. Because if even one descendant survives, someone could claim the throne later. Someone could gather supporters. Someone could challenge the new rule. And so kings protected themselves by erasing the past. The nurse looks at Mephibosheth. He's still playing, still laughing, still making little battle noises with that wooden staff, innocent and oblivious. And she realizes there isn't time for explanations, no time for goodbyes, no time to tell him why his world is about to collapse, only time to run. She grabs him, lifts him into her arms, and bolts through the hallways, downstairs, through gates, past servants scrambling in every direction. Some people are gathering valuables. Others are just trying to escape with their lives. But she has one goal: save the boy. Mephibosheth starts to panic. He doesn't understand what's happening. He tries to ask questions, but her breathing is too strained to answer. Every step she takes is filled with desperation, the weight of the child, the burning in her legs, the terror that someone will appear at any moment to end his life. And then she stumbles. It happens so fast and yet somehow feels slow, like everything stretches out in a nightmare. Her foot slips on stone. She reaches to catch herself, but the momentum pulls her forward, and Mephibosheth falls from her arms onto the cold ground. The impact is brutal. The sound is dry and sharp. His scream tears through the air. The nurse scrambles, crying, trying to pull him up, trying to stand him on his feet so they can keep running. But he can't stand. His legs won't respond. Something inside him has broken. He's 5 years old, and in one moment, he loses the ability to walk. And it isn't just his legs that collapse, it's his whole world. In the same breath, he loses his grandfather, his father, his home, his future, his identity. The palace is gone. The safety is gone. The laughter is gone. The freedom is gone. His nurse clutches him, tears falling onto his face, whispering apologies she can barely form. Mephibosheth is crying too, but it's not just pain. It's confusion, shock, the first taste of a life he never asked for. That day, a prince falls, but the fall isn't only physical. It's the fall of an identity. From that moment on, the child who once ran through palace corridors will be carried, hidden, forgotten, and eventually he will be taken to a place whose name feels like a sentence: Lo-debar. A forgotten village tucked between dry hills and cracked land, where nothing seems to grow. Not crops, not dreams, not hope. It's the kind of place people go when they want to disappear, when they have no future, when they're trying to stay alive by staying unseen. And that's where Mephibosheth grows up. Years pass. The boy becomes a man with a royal name but the life of a fugitive, a man with the bloodline of a prince but the daily reality of exile. He lives in the house of Machir, a man who offers shelter, but shelter isn't the same as restoration. The roof leaks when it rains. The food is simple. The days are repetitive. And the hardest part isn't even the poverty. It's the memory. Sometimes Mephibosheth stares into the distance for long stretches, like he's replaying the same moment over and over. The running, the fall, the sound of his world breaking. Some nights, sitting under a lonely tree, he asks the question he can't escape. Why me? Why did my story get marked by tragedy? Why did I lose everything before I even understood what I had? Why did my life become a hiding place because of a fall that wasn't even my fault? And deep down, another question rises, quieter, heavier. Does God still remember me? Lo-debar doesn't answer, and fear becomes normal. Fear of being discovered, fear of being remembered, fear of hoping and being crushed again. Mephibosheth starts to believe this is how his story ends, hidden, broken, erased. But what he doesn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, is that heaven has already written another chapter, and grace has a way of finding people, even in Lo-debar. Jerusalem was finally quiet. The battles had been fought. The throne was secure. The enemies were pushed back. The nation could breathe again. On paper, David had everything a king could want: wealth, influence, stability, respect. But not every war is fought with swords. Some battles happen when the palace goes silent, when the music fades, when you're alone with your own thoughts. And the past comes walking back into the room. One night, while musicians played in the distance and counselors debated policies in the halls, David stepped away from it all. He walked through the corridors, slower than usual, like he was searching for something he couldn't name. He paused at a balcony and stared out across the rooftops of Jerusalem. The moon washed the city in silver light, but David wasn't looking at the city. He was looking at a memory. And suddenly his heart filled with the face of a friend, his brother in spirit, the one who stood beside him when nobody else did. Jonathan. David could still hear his voice, still picture the strength in his eyes, still feel the weight of the moment when Jonathan had asked for something that went beyond friendship. It was an oath, a covenant, a promise made under the open sky. "Promise me, David, that you will show kindness to my descendants, even after I'm gone." And David had promised. Not casually, not as a polite response. He promised with tears, with sincerity, with a heart locked into the kind of loyalty that doesn't expire when life gets busy. But years passed, wars came, kingdoms shifted, survival demanded attention. And that promise, without anyone meaning to, slipped into the background like a document pushed to the bottom of a drawer. Until that night. It was like something woke up inside David, like God breathed on an old memory and made it burn again. "Do you remember what you promised?" The next morning, David called his servants and officials. The hall filled with leaders, scribes, guards, men who knew how to handle conflict. And the question David asked caught everyone off guard. "Is there anyone still left from the house of Saul that I can show kindness to for Jonathan's sake?" Silence. People exchanged glances. Some looked down, because everyone understood what that question meant. Saul's house represented the old regime, the old bloodline, the family that could have become a threat if anyone survived long enough to reclaim a name. But David wasn't asking because he felt threatened. He was asking because he remembered Jonathan. A servant finally spoke a name that hadn't been said in years: Ziba. Ziba had served Saul. He knew the old household. He knew what was left of it, if anything. When he was brought before the king, David repeated the question, slower this time. "Is there still anyone of Saul's house?" Ziba hesitated, and then he said it. "There is still a son of Jonathan, but he is crippled in his feet. He lives in Lo-debar. And watch this. David doesn't ask a single question that most kings would ask. He doesn't ask, 'Is he strong?' He doesn't ask, 'Is he dangerous?' He doesn't ask, 'Is he loyal?' He doesn't ask, 'Is he useful?' He doesn't ask if the man is worthy. He simply says, 'Bring him to me.' Just like that, a forgotten promise is pulled back into the light. A hidden life is suddenly on the radar of the throne. A name buried in the dust of Lo-debar is spoken inside the palace of Israel's king. And far away, in a place nobody visited on purpose, the day begins like any other. The sun rises over dry hills, the ground is packed dirt, the air is warm and heavy. Lo-debar is not the kind of town that expects surprises. It's the kind of place you end up when you want to be forgotten, when you have nothing to offer, when you're trying to stay alive by staying unseen. Mephibosheth is there, older now, not a child anymore. His face carries years of quiet survival. His body carries the pain of that fall, and his heart carries the deeper wound, the belief that the world moved on without him. And then, something happens that almost never happens in Lo-debar. Dust rises in the distance, not from wind, but from movement. Horses, soldiers, royal flags, a full entourage cutting through the wilderness like a blade. People step outside their homes, shielding their eyes from the sun, trying to understand what they're seeing. Because no king sends his men to Lo-debar. Nobody sends invitations to Lo-debar, but that morning the king's word arrived. The soldiers stop in front of Makir's house, where Mephibosheth has been living. And then the knock comes, hard, loud, impossible to ignore. Tap, tap, tap. Inside the house, everything freezes. Mephibosheth feels it first, not in his ears, but in his chest. A chill runs through him. That old fear returns instantly. The fear he learned as a child, the fear that never fully left. He looks at the older nurse, the same woman who once carried him away from the palace. Her eyes are distressed, like she already knows what he's thinking. He stares at the dirt floor and silently hears the sentence his mind has repeated for years. They found me. After all this time, they finally found me. For a moment he thinks about running, but the thought dies as fast as it appears. Run where? With crippled feet, with nowhere safe left. His whole life has been built around hiding, and now hiding has run out. The door opens slowly, and here's what shocks him. The soldiers don't draw swords. They don't accuse him. They don't call him a traitor. They don't drag him outside as a criminal. One of them simply says, with a formal, steady voice, "Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, King David wants to see you." Those words hit him like lightning. His name, his father, David, the king, the man who replaced Saul, the man connected to Jonathan, the man who now holds all the power to decide whether Mephibosheth lives or disappears. His heart starts pounding, and the questions crash in at once. Why would David want me? Is this revenge dressed up as kindness? Is this mercy? Or a trap? Mephibosheth can't even form a proper response. He lowers his eyes and nods because what else can he do? He's lifted onto an animal, surrounded by soldiers, and taken on the road back toward the place he once called home. But he is not going back as a prince. He's going back as a broken man, carrying a royal name like a burden, carrying a past he can't outrun, carrying fear like it's stitched into his skin. The journey feels endless. Most of the time, Mephibosheth keeps his eyes down. He doesn't want to meet the soldiers' stares. He doesn't want to read judgment in their faces. He doesn't want to feel the weight of being watched, the way he has felt watched his entire life, even when nobody was there. As the walls of Jerusalem come into view, his breathing gets heavier. His chest tightens. Every step closer feels like stepping toward a courtroom where the sentence has already been decided. The gates open. Guards stand in place. Somewhere, trumpets sound. But Mephibosheth barely hears any of it. His mind is flooded with voices from the past, voices that have shaped him for years. You don't belong here. You're just a cripple. You're a disgrace to the royal line. They'll laugh at you. They'll finish what the war started. He tries to stay calm. He tries to hold himself together. But inside, he is unraveling. Two soldiers guide him into the royal hall. Tall columns, rich tapestries, light pouring down through high windows. The same kind of place he once knew as a child. But now it feels distant, like he's looking at someone else's life. And then he sees him, David, the king, the man on the throne that once belonged to Saul, the man who shared covenant love with Jonathan, the man who, in Mephibosheth's mind, could end him with a single word. Mephibosheth moves forward, unsteady. His legs don't support him well, and honestly, his soul supports him even less. The closer he gets, the more the fear crushes him, and finally he can't hold himself up anymore. He falls face down to the floor. No eye contact, no confidence, no demands, no royal pride left in him at all. And with a weak voice soaked in shame, he says the words he truly believes. "Who is your servant?" that you should look at a dead dog like me. That moment in the throne room is one of the most emotionally loaded scenes in the entire story because it's not just a crippled man bowing before a king. It's trauma bowing. It's fear bowing. It's a life spent hiding, finally stepping into the light and expecting the light to burn. Mephibosheth is face down on the floor, trembling, waiting for the sentence. He doesn't even try to defend himself. He doesn't try to explain his loyalty. He doesn't try to prove anything. He's already convinced he's not worth saving. And then David speaks. Not with anger, not with suspicion, not with politics. He says his name, Mephibosheth. Just that. And you have to catch how powerful that is, because when someone is used to being ignored, being remembered feels dangerous. When someone has lived in hiding, being called forward feels like exposure. When someone has learned to survive by shrinking, hearing your name spoken in the center of power can feel like the beginning of your end. But David doesn't say his name to destroy him. David says his name to restore him. Mephibosheth stammers a response, still face down. "Here is your servant." And then David says the sentence Mephibosheth never expected to hear in his lifetime. "Do not fear." Those 3 words are more than comfort. They're a breaking point. Because fear has been Mephibosheth's companion for years. Fear shaped his decisions. Fear shaped his identity. Fear defined his relationships. Fear kept him in Lo-debar. Fear kept his dreams small. Fear kept his head down. And the king looks at him and says, "Do not fear." Then David keeps going. "For I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake. Not because you earned it. Not because you proved yourself. Not because you fought bravely. Not because you were useful. For Jonathan's sake." This is covenant language. This is promise language. This is grace that isn't based on performance. And then David says something even bigger. "I will restore to you all the land of Saul, your grandfather." Catch what just happened. Mephibosheth came in expecting execution. Instead, he's being given an inheritance. The lands Saul once owned, lands that represented wealth, dignity, security, identity. David says, "They're yours now." And then the king adds the line that changes the entire story. "And you shall eat bread at my table continually." Not once, not occasionally, not as a visitor. Continually. Mephibosheth can barely process it. A man who has lived in Lo-debar, now invited to the king's table. A man who once felt like a dead dog, now treated like family. A man who has spent years being defined by a fall, now being redefined by a promise. And right there, Mephibosheth's mind is probably racing. Is this real? Is this a trick? Is David setting me up? Because when you've been wounded for a long time, kindness can feel suspicious. You start believing that good news always has a hidden knife behind it. You don't know how to receive love without flinching. But David is serious, and he proves it immediately. He turns to Ziba, the servant of Saul, and gives clear instructions. Ziba and his sons and his servants are to work the land. They're to harvest crops. They're to manage the property. They're to bring provision to Mephibosheth. In other words, David doesn't just offer words. He provides structure. He sets up a system of restoration so Mephibosheth's new life isn't fragile. Mephibosheth is no longer just kept alive. He is being established. Ziba, hearing this, bows and says something like, "Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands." But even if Ziba obeys, we'll later see that his heart is complicated. That's part of the realism of this story. People can comply outwardly while wrestling inwardly. But for now, the main thing is clear. The king has spoken. The forgotten son is being brought home. Mephibosheth's head slowly lifts. His eyes are wet. His face carries disbelief. He tries to speak, but he can't find the right words. All he can say is a repeated bow, like he's trying to apologize for existing. "What is your servant, that you should regard me?" But David doesn't answer that question directly, because grace doesn't argue with your shame. Grace overrides it, and from that day on, Mephibosheth's life changes in ways he couldn't even imagine. He moves to Jerusalem. He leaves Lo-debar behind, at least physically. He enters a new environment filled with noise, activity, and constant movement. The smells are different: fresh bread, incense, cooked meat, polished wood. The sounds are different too: harp strings, guards calling orders, footsteps echoing in hallways. And for the first time in years, Mephibosheth isn't living like someone waiting to be discovered. He's living like someone already welcomed. Now picture it: the king's table. It's long and heavy, carved from solid wood. Bowls of fruit, fresh bread steaming, platters of roasted meat, wine poured, servants moving in rhythm, conversations overlapping, laughter in the air. And Mephibosheth sits there, not at the edge, not hidden in a corner, not treated like a charity case. He sits as a son. The text even emphasizes it. He ate at the king's table like one of the king's sons. And that's where this story gets quietly profound, because when Mephibosheth sits at the table, his feet are under the table, meaning his weakness is covered, his limp is still real, the fall still happened. The brokenness didn't vanish, but in the presence of the king, at the table of fellowship, what defined him most in his mind is no longer the first thing anyone sees. That's not denial, that's redemption. It's not that his story didn't include pain. It's that pain no longer had the right to write the ending. And if you're listening to this like a story from far away, let me bring it closer. Mephibosheth is a picture of what happens when your life is marked by something you didn't choose: a fall, a betrayal, an accident, and mistake you didn't commit but still paid for, a season that damaged you, a past that keeps replaying, a label that sticks, and you start believing, this is who I am now: broken, unwanted, less than. But then the king calls your name. And not because you earned it, because of covenant, because of promise, because of grace. David didn't invite Mephibosheth because Mephibosheth brought value to the kingdom. David invited him because David remembered Jonathan. And in the same way, grace doesn't start with your performance. It starts with God's character. Now, I want you to notice something else. The invitation wasn't just to receive land. It was to receive presence. You will eat at my table continually. That means relationship. It means belonging. It means access, because land can be taken again, money can be lost, titles can be stripped. But a seat at the table means you're no longer an outsider. And Mephibosheth, who spent years outside, is now inside, not visiting, living, included. And you'd think the story would end there, beautiful and complete. But life is rarely that clean, right? Later, there's a moment when David is fleeing Jerusalem because of Absalom's rebellion. Chaos returns, uncertainty rises again. And during that season, Ziba, Saul's former servant, comes to David with gifts. He brings food and wine and supplies. And David asks, "Where is Mephibosheth?" Ziba gives a damaging report. He claims Mephibosheth stayed behind, hoping to reclaim the throne. In other words, he paints him as ungrateful and disloyal. David, in the stress of crisis, reacts quickly and gives Ziba the land. But later, when David returns, Mephibosheth comes out to meet him, and his appearance says everything. He looks like someone who has been mourning, unwashed, untrimmed, distressed. Not the look of a man plotting a takeover, the look of a man grieving the king's absence. And Mephibosheth explains, "I couldn't go, I'm crippled, and Ziba deceived me." Now, some people get caught up in the land dispute there. And yes, David ends up splitting the land between them, likely trying to resolve it quickly. But the heart of Mephibosheth's response is what matters most. He says, "Let him take it all, since my lord the king has returned safely." Did you catch that? The land didn't matter as much as the relationship. The blessing wasn't just property. The blessing was presence. Because when you've been pulled out of Lo-debar, when you've been given a seat at the table, when you've been called by name, your heart changes. You stop clinging to things because you've tasted something deeper than things. So what's the hidden message in Mephibosheth's story? It's that your worst moment doesn't get the final word. His story started with a fall, but it didn't end there. His life was shaped by tragedy, but it wasn't defined by it. He was the grandson of a rejected king, but he became the honored guest of a new one. He was carried into hiding, but he was called into the light, and the kindness that found him wasn't random. It was covenant kindness, the kind of love that remembers promises even when time passes, the kind of grace that reaches into forgotten places, the kind of restoration that doesn't ask you to walk perfectly before you're welcomed. If you've ever felt like Lo-debar was your address, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, if you've ever felt like you were forgotten, disqualified, too damaged, too late, Mephibosheth is proof that the king still asks, "Is there anyone left?" Not to punish, to restore, not to expose, to bring home, not to remind you of what you lost, but to show you what grace can rebuild. And when you sit at the table, you realize something that changes everything. Your weakness may still exist, but it no longer determines where you belong. Because when grace calls your name, it doesn't just change your location, it changes your identity. And that is the hidden story of Mephibosheth.